it's also the way in which the ancients were constantly sort of looking at metaphor and looking at the literal and kind of like occupying a space in between. Homer does the same thing. Right when you think, okay, Homer is, everything is metaphorical. The gods don't exist. It's just metaphorical. And then something he'll say something that'll make no, that's not a metaphor. But then you think, okay, all right, fine. He's talking about literal gods and, magic and things like that. And then you're like, no, not really. I don't know. There's room for doubt there. And Homer occupies this sort of in-between space, right?
And, and some people don't like that kind of style of writing. I get it. But here's the thing that
Right.
I always remember, because people talk about, is your interpretation literal or figurative?
Right.
Okay. Now, here's the, as a guy that's a
My
debate
answer is
coach,
yes.
well, all language is to some level figurative. Like
Yes.
even our conversation right now is us
Yeah.
exchanging figurative concepts,
Yeah.
and so I think that's kind of like a cheap out that atheists try to use. It's like, well, yeah, all language, like we were like Luke was limited by the technology of his day. He had a scroll, and that was about all he had, and so he had to record with that, and that was how we basically
Well, to
got.
be fair, most atheists, at least today, like the new atheists at least, tend not to look at anything as metaphorical. They see metaphor as the excuse that theists use in order to get out of contradictions. Oh, it's just a metaphor, so we don't have to worry about it. And so they want to. It's interesting, but the people who interpret the Bible most literally that I know are evangelicals and atheists. Like they both tend to have very literal interpretations of the Bible, right?
Yeah,
Like if you're an atheist, you're going to
with
want
you
to
on that
point
one.
to Genesis and say, "Oh, look at this boat that was floating in the water for 40 days and held two of every animal on earth that couldn't possibly fit on the Bible or whatever." They want it. It doesn't occur to them that no, the boat represents God's wrath and the water represents His grace, and that sort of thing. They never really see the story in that way. And
Yeah, it's like
similarly, my
Christ is the
evangelical friends
ark.
would do the same thing.
Christ is the ark that will save us. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, sure. Although in the story itself, they didn't know about Christ yet. So, I mean, the idea of God's grace was a thing even in the Old Testament, and certainly God's forgiveness. There's a lot in that story that if you only take it literally, Saint Augustine it talks about this. He talks about how if you take this hyper literal interpretation of Genesis, then you're doing a disservice to Christianity, because by their fruits you shall know them, and people are making judgments on Christianity because of all of these like ways that we approach what we would today call science. But of course, science wasn't the word science didn't mean that back then. But he would say, if you take what you know about the natural world, it obviously contradicts a literal interpretation of parts of Genesis, and so you can't take those parts of Genesis literally. And if you do, then you're discrediting Christianity, and we should be lifting up Christianity, not discrediting it. Well, that's what Augustine says.
now, one thing that I always point to, and when it comes to like the flood, okay,
Yeah.
because yes, like I do take a very evangelical stance on it, and what I usually say to folks is, don't look for naturalistic explanations to supernatural events. Okay, like Christ's resurrection, for example. Don't look for some naturalistic explanation to what is a supernatural event. Okay, and so like there are certain events in the Bible where it's like, no, I have to put my faith in it and take it at face value. And that was part of actually what the beginning and sort of the middle part of the sermon was about today, because
Mhm.
they for years they used to say that Pontius Pilate was procurator of Judea because that's what Tacitus wrote. But
Right.
then we found the Pilate stone that said he was actually governor of Judea, just like the Bible said. Well, guess for 1600 years, guess which side modern academics took?
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, like that's sort of always the problem is, but so to us, like as Christians, like, no, you have to put your faith in the Bible in the end. Like this is God is telling us this is
Well, but also we're
the way.
told not to put our faith on false, foundations. And I would argue
People
that
twist the Bible wrong. You are correct.
yeah, if we try to literalize parts of the Bible, like I think I'm saying something very similar to what you're saying, at least on the surface, sounds very similar to what you're saying, which is you wouldn't conflate those two things, right? You wouldn't try to look for a naturalistic explanation for a supernatural event, which is why things like the resurrection of Christ are I wouldn't put that in a science book, right? Because you wouldn't look for a material explanation for that, or a secular explanation for that, or a scientific explanation for that. Like those to me, those are two different worlds. And so, yeah.
I look at it that science is nothing more than the study and observation of God's creation. Like, and so I don't see the huge contradiction between the two that a lot
Mhm.
of people do, and so that's the way I always look at it. Now, I get
Okay,
some more
I'll give
books
you an
that I sort of
example. My favorite passage in the Bible, you know, this is Matthew 13, right? where where they do try to take a naturalistic sort of interpretation of something that Christ is talking about, and it's when he was talking about the parable of the sower, where you're throwing seeds on the ground and it's landing on the rocks sometimes, and it's landing on the soil sometimes, or whatever, and then people start talking about it as though they're starting to talk about the science of the rocks and the
yeah.
science of the
Yeah,
seeds and things like.
he's talking like he's giving them a botany lesson.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And when they go to him, when the apostles go to him, he says, "Well, they're they're seen, but they do not hear, right? And so on. Wait, the looking but do not see, and listening but do not hear, sort of answer.
Yep.
In other words, they're not looking with the correct paradigm by which to interpret his words, right? So let's say there was something in there, like when the Bible, for instance, says that describes all kinds of birds, and one of the things that's inside of that is a bat. Well, we know scientifically today that a bat is not a bird, but this is not like a scientific biological explanation of animals. This is that was something else, right? And so you would never, just like you would never talk about literal seeds and literal rocks, when in that one Jesus actually says, obviously you shouldn't be interpreting this literally, it should be a metaphor. This is why I speak in parables. I combine that with Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, and we know Jesus is God, right? So that means if Jesus speaks in parables in this particular way, and we should not be putting him to the test in the scientific sense, then we shouldn't be doing that with the Old Testament either, or with anything that God says, right? Because he is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
Well, exactly, and that would be kind of silly. And what I always this is the way I put it, and this is
That's why I
uh,
wouldn't put a literal flood on him, right? I wouldn't be looking for historical examples of a literal flood that went worldwide and all that kind of stuff, because I don't think that's what the story was about.
well, I mean, we'll figure that we'll figure out who's right when we meet in
But
paradise.
it's also not important, right? Like we agree, it's not. That's not what's important about those
Like
things.
you, what I always say is, even your favorite theologian was no more than 80% right on his best day. Okay,
Like if
so
it turned
you're
out,
not going to get into heaven based on how much truth you have stored up in your head.
like
Okay, you're going to get in based on how much truth you've lived with your life. Now, but